Picture this. 9 skilled hikers venture into the Russian wilderness, experienced and filled with the joy of adventure. But they never return.
More than 60 years ago, 9 experienced hikers died mysteriously in the frozen Ural Mountains, leaving behind a scene so bizarre that no one could fully explain it. What forced this group to slash open their tent from the inside and flee into the night without proper clothing, even as temperatures plunged well below freezing? Despite countless theories ranging from secret military experiments to paranormal encounters, the truth remained elusive. Until now, new AI-driven analysis has unearthed chilling insights that challenge every assumption we held about this haunting tragedy. The unfolding tragedy. In the dead of winter, on a remote slope in the Ural Mountains, 9 skilled hikers met a fate so puzzling that it has baffled investigators for decades. When rescuers finally discovered their campsite, the scene was chilling. A tent completely slashed from the inside, personal belongings left untouched, and bodies scattered across the snow, many inexplicably half-dressed. This apparent rush to abandon shelter in sub-zero temperatures without boots or coats defied common sense and exposed a deep mystery. Why would 9 experienced mountaineers flee into the icy wilderness under such conditions? This was the first question that haunted investigators and the public alike. The hikers' footprints showed no signs of panic or chaos. Instead, they left the tent calmly, in bare feet or socks, steadily moving downhill toward a forest about a mile away before the tracks vanished. That quiet, deliberate exit from their only shelter made the story even more confusing. They seemed to understand the danger, but made a decision no one could easily explain. Nearby, a small fire smoldered, evidence they had tried to survive the brutal cold. Yet the injuries on some of the bodies were far from typical hypothermia. Several had devastating internal trauma that seemed impossible to reconcile with their outdoor conditions. Investigators faced a haunting paradox. Some of the hikers died from exposure, but others had injuries reminiscent of high-impact accidents, crushed ribs and fractured skulls, without corresponding external wounds. How could this be? And what forced them to leave a safe camp in the first place? Families and experts alike were left with more questions than answers, while the government dismissed the cause as an unknown, compelling natural force. This puzzling phrase only deepened the mystery. Decades of speculation filled this void, but the most important evidence, it seemed, remained buried in silence. The lack of any clear explanation drove rumors and wild theories. Was it a military accident? A paranormal event? The truth was elusive, locked away in cryptic reports and unanswered questions. Slowly, the mystery coalesced around a tragic night when something compelled a group of prepared, confident hikers into a fatal escape from shelter. This core enigma of why they fled and what exactly happened first that night remains the gripping center of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Its strange details capture imagination and fear, a narrative of desperate survival in the face of an unseen threat. Yet, many crucial facts still awaited a fitting explanation, one that would only come decades later. The unsettling condition of the site and survivors' behavior posed an impossible puzzle that no ordinary event could explain. It challenged assumptions about nature, human endurance, and even reality itself. Each clue only thickened the fog enveloping the tragedy. Despite the passage of time, the eerie scene at Dyatlov Pass continues to haunt. The frozen silence of that night still echoes, inviting new eyes and fresh technology to shed light on what really transpired. What emerges from this enigma may forever change how we see this cold, forbidding place. Transitioning into the human side of the story, let's explore the lives and motivations of the group who set out on this fateful journey. The expedition's background. In January 1959, a group of 10 individuals, students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, embarked on a demanding trek designed to earn their highest mountaineering certification. The challenge was clear: complete a rugged 300-kilometer route through remote frozen wilderness to prove endurance and skill in extreme conditions. Among them was their leader, Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student known for his meticulous planning and steady leadership under pressure. The team's composition reflected experience, resilience, and a shared enthusiasm for adventure. These weren't reckless amateurs venturing blindly into danger. Each had successfully completed previous demanding expeditions and was well acclimated to cold weather. Their families described them as athletes who thrived in nature, embracing the harsh Russian winters as a test of strength and character. For them, the journey was both a personal challenge and a symbol of Soviet endurance and pride. Completing the so-called Category 3 certification was a prestigious accomplishment, demonstrating physical courage and technical expertise. The itinerary was ambitious but measured. They planned to ski from the settlement of Vizhay, pushing through dense forest and mountain peaks to reach Mount Otorten. The name of this mountain, which translates in the local Mansi language as "don't go there," was more folklore than warning to the team. They saw it as part of the adventure rather than a sinister omen. The Soviet spirit of the time emphasized conquering nature through grit and science, bolstering confidence in facing any hardship. On January 25th, the group boarded their train northward, full of optimism. Traveling together, they sang and joked, capturing memories in diaries and photographs, documents that would survive to tell a story frozen in time. By January 27th, they stocked up in the last inhabited settlement before their route plunged into isolated wilderness. The mood was light, their camaraderie strong, until pain and weariness began to chip away at their resolve. One member, Yuri Udin, began dealing with sciatica and knee pain that kept getting worse shortly after. He didn't really have much of a choice, it felt like, and so he turned back reluctantly, sparing himself, but leaving the other 9 behind. Udin would later wrestle with survivor's guilt, kind of stuck on the question of what might have happened if he'd stayed. In the meantime, the rest went on, not knowing they were walking straight into that darker shade of tragedy. Along the way, diary entries and photos showed them kind of bonding, sharing the same roughness, preparing meals, tossing out jokes, and even arguing about how good their skiing really was. Even with harsh weather and that near-constant cold, their mood stayed stubbornly steady. Still, fate's cold hand was creeping closer. A sudden blizzard on February 1st shoved them into an area they didn't recognize, and from there, a chain reaction started, one nobody could have imagined beforehand. Dyatlov made the key decision to camp on a barren slope, rather than go down into the sheltering forest. To experienced mountaineers, this didn't look purely reckless, more like tactical thinking, keeping their progress toward the end plan, even while conditions were getting nasty. The campers cleared out a flat place in the snow, then settled in for what would end up being their final meal together. Cameras caught their wrapped-up, awkward smiles, journals logged everyday moments with humor and a little hope still showing. That night, everything looked calm, but it was just covering an approaching nightmare. The campsite itself held the clearest hints of that horror, strange, chilling clues that first responders found when they arrived weeks later. The strange camp discovery. On February 26th, nearly 4 weeks after the group was overdue, searchers finally stumbled upon the tent on the slope of Kholat Syakhl, a peak whose name chillingly means Mountain of the Dead in the local Mansi dialect. The shed canvas was half buried in snow and tilted noticeably, but it still stood, oddly intact. Yet something was unmistakably wrong. The tent had been slashed open from the inside with sharp knives, its walls ripped wide enough to let snow pour in. Rescue teams found boots and coats left behind, neatly arranged, as if the hikers had fled in haste, but with unresolved urgency. Inside the tent, blankets and essential gear remained untouched, puzzling everyone. Why would 9 experienced hikers abandon shelter in sub-zero temperatures, cutting their way out rather than simply unzipping the entrance? This act alone sparked numerous questions. For seasoned mountaineers, opening a tent from the inside was safe and easy. Their seemingly calm but desperate escape defied explanation. Footprints in the snow offered further strange details. At least 8 or 9 distinct tracks led away from the camp, but none showed fully outfitted hikers. Instead, some prints revealed bare feet, others socks, and one showed a single shoe. These steps moved steadily downhill to the forest about a mile away before fading into snowdrifts. The pattern suggested a purposeful retreat, not blind panic or a chaotic flight. The first 2 bodies, found near the forest edge under that sprawling cedar tree, only made the mystery deeper somehow. Both men were seen scantily dressed in underwear, their hands raw and bloody, as if they'd been clawing at the tree bark, desperately, for survival. Close by, rescuers also turned up the remains of a small fire, like someone had tried to make a little warmth against the biting cold. Still, any staying alive there was short and hopeless. Then, between the cedar and the tent, 3 more bodies showed up, including Igor Dyatlov himself. Each one lay some distance from the others, and it looked like they'd each just dropped while trying to get back to camp. Their faces and hands basically said the same ugly tale of exhaustion and pain. Some had minor skull fractures, yet none carried defensive injuries, so investigators had to assume there wasn't an attack or any real struggle. These broken, scattered scenes, altogether, painted a picture of suffering and confusion, without a clean explanation. The search kept going for the last 4. By early May, once the snow softened and opened up the view of a ravine farther into the woods, searchers located their bodies inside a shallow cave. The hikers were dressed in extra layers, reportedly taken from their fallen companions, meant to help them fend off freezing. But the injuries were shocking. Fractured skulls, crushed chests, broken ribs, and worst of all, missing pieces, tongue matter, and parts of the face. The wounds didn't match anything investigators had ever seen before. The secrets woven into these snowy footprints and torn canvas would eventually draw us toward explanations both known and unimaginable. Early theories and speculations. The mysterious circumstances at Dyatlov Pass quickly ignited a whirlwind of theories, each trying to make sense of the baffling details left behind. Some early explanations reached far beyond the realm of the ordinary, fueled by eerie clues and the harsh backdrop of Cold War secrecy. Among the most popular theories was that the hikers had encountered something extraterrestrial. Locals in settlements around the Ural Mountains reported seeing unusual, glowing spheres drifting slowly through the night sky in the same week the group disappeared. These orbs were described as too large, too slow, and too persistent to be natural phenomena like flares or meteors, waking imaginations about UFO involvement. Evidence supporting these claims pointed to blurry photographs developed from the hikers' own cameras, which captured strange streaks of light cutting through the dark sky. For some, these images were proof that the group had witnessed alien activity, made a desperate attempt to document it, and suffered grim consequences as a result. The official investigation acknowledged these glowing orbs, but conspicuously failed to pursue this lead further, deepening suspicions of a possible cover-up. With the secretive Soviet atmosphere as a backdrop, the UFO theory grew not just plausible, but almost inevitable in the public mind. Beyond extraterrestrials, other paranormal explanations surfaced. Ball lightning, a rare atmospheric phenomenon capable of producing glowing orbs, was floated as a natural cause that might explain the strange lights and panic among the hikers. However, ball lightning typically dissipates quickly and rarely causes lasting damage, failing to fully account for the serious internal injuries found on some victims. The connection fell short, as the mystery's more brutal aspects clung stubbornly to remain unexplained. An altogether different idea seized public attention when a Soviet newspaper sensationalized the tragedy by blaming it on the legendary abominable snowman. Blurry photographs from the hikers' collection seemed to show a shadowy humanoid figure lurking near the ridge. The suggestion of a giant, unknown creature stalking the mountains made for compelling headlines. Yet investigators found no claw marks, no tracks, and no evidence of any animal attack around the campsite or bodies, rejecting the Yeti hypothesis as mere tabloid fantasy. Paranormal stories still kept on resonating, and that makes sense, I guess. They gave people an easy narrative to hold on to. Mysterious lights, weird injuries, government secrecy, all kind of packed in an otherworldly little package. It was especially appealing in a time and place where nobody trusted official statements and where fear lived everywhere like a second layer of air. The unknown felt somehow safer than the plain cold truth about human frailty or just straight-up error. But the human side wasn't completely left behind either. Another line of thought said the hikers were kind of indirect victims of secret Soviet military testing. The remote Ural Mountains became a background, like a stage, for classified experiments, and those were often linked to new weapons. One theory talked about parachute mines, air-dropped explosives meant to explode above ground. The idea was that they could cause major internal damage without leaving much on the surface. As mystifying as the theories were, the official investigation itself proved no less confounding. Official investigation and findings. The official investigation launched immediately after the hikers' bodies were recovered, but instead of clarity, it added layers of confusion and silence. Rescuers entering the campsite were struck by inexplicable details. A tent slashed open from the inside, coats and boots abandoned, gear neatly arranged as if the hikers had planned to return. These facts suggested a hurried but oddly calm exit, defying common sense when faced with sub-zero temperatures. Investigators recognized these as clues that didn't fit any conventional explanation. Autopsies deepened the mystery. 5 of the hikers died from hypothermia, the expected cause in such harsh conditions. However, 4 others bore massive trauma, crushed rib cages, fractured skulls that seemed inconsistent with falls or animal attacks. Particularly baffling was the near absence of external injuries that would typically accompany such violent internal damage, making medical examiners question the forces involved. These severe injuries resembled the impact from a high-speed car accident rather than any known wilderness hazard. One victim, Lyudmila Dubinina, presented the most disturbing case. Her tongue, eyes, part of her lips, and facial tissue were missing, leading to grotesque speculation. Officially, examiners attributed these losses to decomposition and scavenging animals, but grieving families and many observers found the explanation cold comfort. The scene suggested something more sinister was at play. Adding to the confusion, several bodies showed burns on their hands and legs, though only a small fire was found nearby. Some skin showed an unusual deep orange-brown discoloration that relatives insisted did not reflect their appearance before death. Meanwhile, the presence of radioactive isotopes on certain clothing puzzled everyone. How such contamination occurred in isolated wilderness raised questions about possible exposure during their studies or at work, but the connection remained murky at best. The hikers had kept detailed diaries and several cameras, painting a picture of normalcy in the days leading up to the tragedy. They recorded jokes, plans, and a light atmosphere that belied the dangers ahead. Their last photographs, taken before the incident, showed smiling faces despite worsening weather. Yet, some of the final images were blurry night shots, hinting at mysterious lights in the sky, adding fuel to UFO and secret weapons theories. The footprints leading from the tent exhibited another unusual element: calm, steady movement in various states of dress. Bare feet, socks, one shoe, rather than frantic fleeing. This suggested the group was under some compulsion, fleeing not in chaos but with a deliberate purpose, as if forced by an unseen force or urgent threat. This unnerved investigators and deepened the sense that something extraordinary had driven their flight. Local indigenous Mansi hunters, interviewed as part of the inquiry, denied any hostile involvement and expressed sorrow over the tragedy. There was no evidence of a violent human conflict. No defensive wounds were found, and no weapons identified near the campsite. The atmosphere of secrecy and unanswered questions was fertile ground for a complex web of natural explanations seeking to bridge the gap between confusion and closure. Natural explanations revisited. In the decades following the tragedy, researchers searched for answers rooted in the harsh realities of the Ural Mountains environment. One of the most compelling natural explanations focused on katabatic winds, powerful, sudden downdrafts of cold air that can sweep deadly force down mountain slopes. These winds have been known to flatten tents and chill explorers to death in polar regions. If a strong katabatic surge had hit the hikers' campsite, it might explain their desperate, calm escape into freezing darkness, cutting through the tent to avoid suffocation or collapse. The theory suggests the group fled not blindly, but coerced by an overwhelming environmental force beyond their control. Another environmental theory involved infrasound, low-frequency sound waves produced when wind flows over certain mountain shapes. Though inaudible to the human ear, infrasound can cause feelings of dizziness, nausea, and intense panic. Studies proposed that the dome-shaped peak near their camp could have generated such vibrations, triggering overwhelming terror among the hikers. This might explain why experienced mountaineers would abandon proper clothing and shelter without signs of chaos or struggle, driven instead by an inexplicable, paralyzing fear. These explanations contain an element of rationality, neatly accounting for the seemingly irrational behavior that confounded investigators. Knowing the brutal mountain environment is unforgiving lends credibility to the idea that nature itself was the culprit. Yet, these theories struggle to fully account for some of the most disturbing physical evidence. Katabatic winds and infrasound can induce panic and flight, but they cannot cause skull fractures or crush rib cages. The hikers' injuries demanded a mechanistic force far beyond simple wind or fear. A broader examination considered potential human or animal causes. Early suspicion briefly fell on the Mansi, the indigenous people who lived in the region. Some speculated the hikers might have trespassed on sacred land, provoking violent retaliation. This possibility was quickly dismissed when the many joined the search efforts and expressed sorrow for the tragedy. No evidence was found to indicate human attack, and none of the hikers bore defensive wounds. Similarly, animal attacks were kinda ruled out. While bears and wolves roamed around the Urals, searchers did not find any clear tracks near the campsite or bodies that would point to predatory activity. Also, those slashes in the tent's fabric came from the inside, so the whole notion of an outside assault kind of falls away. And the missing tongues and eyes of one victim, which had been blown up in the headlines, were explained in a way that felt convincing enough, like post-mortem scavenging by smaller animals plus natural decomposition, not some brutal attack. The natural theories had their strong points, but also they left big, awkward gaps. Environmental forces seemed able to cover the panic and the quick departure, and by eliminating animals and human violence, the investigators essentially kept staring at the landscape as the main culprit. Yet, they still couldn't really account for the catastrophic injuries, bones crushed without obvious external trauma, or the radiation findings that did not line up cleanly. On top of that, the odd skin discoloration that was observed did not fit neatly either. Those contradictions basically kept the door open for more exploration. The possibilities unlocked by cutting-edge analysis opened a door to understanding that had seemed permanently sealed by time and confusion. Advanced AI analysis. Years after countless theories and investigations, modern technology breathed new life into the Dyatlov Pass mystery. Research teams turned to artificial intelligence and sophisticated computational modeling to simulate the complex conditions the hikers faced that fateful night. By combining physics, snow mechanics, and computer science, these AI-driven efforts sought to reconstruct the exact sequence of events with unprecedented detail. This scientific innovation changed the way experts could examine environmental forces and how they interacted with the campsite and the group. At the forefront of this work was a team from ETH Zurich, one of Europe's leading science institutes. Using advanced snow dynamics simulations originally developed with help from Disney's animation scientists for realistic snow effects in films, researchers adapted this technology for rigorous scientific purposes. Their goal was to model fragile snowpacks and hidden weak layers that could trigger sudden slab avalanches without leaving obvious signs. This approach represented a breakthrough, as previous investigations had struggled to explain how an avalanche, or something like it, might strike without the dramatic debris and damage typically expected. The AI-powered models showed that the hiker's tent, pitched on an exposed slope just below the mountain crest, rested on a precarious snowpack. The slope, around 30 degrees, seemed marginal for avalanches, leading many early observers to discount this as a cause. But simulations revealed that even a modest, localized slab avalanche could fracture suddenly, sliding down with immense force, yet leaving minimal surface evidence, especially after weeks of snowfall and wind that could erase traces. This subtle yet deadly phenomenon could deliver the precise internal injuries found on several victims while pinning the tent and forcing the group to abandon it abruptly. According to the new analysis, when the slab broke loose, it crashed onto the tent with crushing pressure. Several hikers were likely injured instantly, sustaining fractured ribs and skull trauma consistent with the autopsy reports. Trapped in near-total darkness and snow collapse, the remaining hikers were forced to cut their way out from inside the tent, a desperate, calculated act matching the cut patterns found. This moment marked a turning point, shifting their fight from maintaining shelter to surviving a brutal, exposed flight into freezing night. The footprints traced calmly downhill reflect this transition. The group, injured and frightened, but not panicked, fled in deliberate stages toward the forest. Their attempt to build a small fire, stripping branches to fuel it, fits the narrative of survivors trying to endure despite dire circumstances. Tragically, many lacked sufficient clothing or shoes, with fatal consequences as temperatures plunged below -30 degrees Celsius. AI reconstruction also offers new clarity on the mysterious second collapse, where 4 hikers sought shelter in a ravine only to be buried by heavy snow once more. This event explains the severe internal trauma without external wounds on the last discovered bodies and accounts for their deeper, inaccessible burial site. The pattern of injuries and locations now aligns with a consistent natural force rather than any inexplicable attacker. The artificial intelligence approach also demystifies seemingly odd pieces of evidence. The radioactive traces on the clothing likely originated from the hikers' prior occupational exposures, rather than a secret weapons test. The strange glowing orbs reported by locals can be linked to coincidental Soviet missile tests occurring in the region, unrelated to the tragedy. As these new findings come to light, the chilling reality of that night grows clearer and far more disturbing than anyone imagined. The disturbing new conclusion. After decades of speculation, confusion, and unanswered questions, the Dyatlov Pass mystery finally saw a breakthrough thanks to advanced AI-assisted analysis and scientific modeling. The conclusion reached by recent researchers paints a grim yet natural picture of the tragic night in February 1959. The hikers fell victim to a slab avalanche, a subtle but deadly phenomenon where a cohesive block of snow breaks free from a slope and slides down with immense force. Unlike dramatic, sprawling avalanches often seen in movies, this type was localized and left almost no trace, explaining why rescuers initially found no direct evidence of such an event. The group had unknowingly set up their tent on an exposed slope just below the mountain's crest. Dyatlov himself had carved into the snow to create a flat campsite on what seemed like a marginal slope of around 30 degrees. This seemingly innocuous decision triggered disaster once additional snow piled up during the night. Under the increasing weight, a slab fractured and collapsed onto the tent. The crushing force would have caused immediate injuries, consistent with the fractures and skull trauma later recorded on several of the hikers. Trapped beneath the snow and their damaged tent, the hikers were forced into a desperate escape. They cut their way out from inside, explaining why the tent was slashed open from the inside rather than unzipped normally. The calm, deliberate footprints leading away from the camp reflect a group injured, but trying to survive rather than fleeing in blind panic. Without proper shoes or clothing, they sought nearby shelter in the forest, attempting to build a fire to survive the bitter cold. Tragically, the freezing temperatures and also the absence of proper gear quickly just overwhelmed many of them. Two of the hikers were found close to a smoldering fire, their hands badly wounded from trying to climb a nearby tree, like they really, desperately, went for warmth and safety. Other people tried to head back to camp, utterly drained and seriously hurt, but they just folded before they could get there, period. The last four sought refuge in a ravine deeper in the forest, though they were crushed when a secondary collapse of snow came down. That later avalanche, it helps explain the grim internal damage with no obvious outward signs, because the huge weight and pressure came from snow pressing them hard against rough ground. And yeah, this newer theory kind of stitches together almost every previously baffling clue. The tense condition, the way the footprints were set, the strange injuries, and the positions of the bodies all line up into one connected, natural chain. Radiation marks on clothing were argued to be more likely from earlier job-related exposure, rather than contamination right at the location. As for the talk about odd glowing orbs, those can be tied to unrelated Soviet missile or rocket tests happening in the area around then. Even missing tongues and eyes, well, decomposition plus scavengers do a lot of that work. For years, the lukewarm official conclusion, deaths caused by an unknown, irresistible natural force, kind of invited all sorts of wild talk and conspiracy stuff. But this straightforward, scientific idea, anchored in the brutal mechanics of mountain snow, finally makes things clearer. It also shows how a small mistake in choosing the campsite position, mixed with conditions that do not forgive, can turn deadly. The story is no longer wrapped up in mystery, and with this cold, methodical logic, it feels even more chilling. The Dyatlov Pass story, once tangled in myth and fear, now unfolds with scientific clarity thanks to AI. It's a chilling reminder of nature's power and the fragility of human life. If you found this exploration compelling, please like and subscribe for more revealing stories that challenge what we think we know.